Good afternoon. I'm Andria Derstine, the director of the Allen Memorial Art Museum, and I'm delighted to welcome you for today's talk with Dr. Barbara Wolanin. I'd like to thank Jill Greenwood, Liz Yearsley, and Megan Harding of our Education and Communications Department for their work on publicizing today's event, as well as Emily Cole and her team in the college's alumni office. I'm particularly pleased to welcome Dr. Wolanin, who is an alumna of the Oberlin College class of '66 and received an MA from Oberlin in 1969, back to Oberlin and to the Allen, even if virtually, to speak with us about her fascinating work caring for the art in the US Capitol and other federal buildings. The Capitol in particular has been much on our minds following the terrible events of January 6, exactly 4 months ago today. Our speaker clearly has a very unique perspective on this and can share that with us later, but more importantly, she will share many of the facets of her work there during 3 decades of dedicated care for our irreplaceable national collections. Now Curator Emerita, Dr. Wolanin, during her 30 years serving as curator for the architect of the Capitol, managed the conservation of numerous works of art, including murals by Constantino Brumidi and others in both the Capitol building and the Jefferson building of the Library of Congress. She also managed the conservation of indoor and outdoor sculpture, including the Statue of Freedom atop the dome. She additionally advised on and managed the acceptance and commissioning of art, and also oversaw the records management and archives and photography branches. She authored the book Constantino Brumidi, Artist of the Capitol for the Congress, as well as a very large number of articles, essays, and reviews. Dr. Wolanin received her PhD in art history from the University of Wisconsin, and in addition to her master's degree in art history from Oberlin, she received a Master of Art in Teaching from Harvard after graduating from Oberlin in 1966 summa cum laude. One of the most intriguing and meaningful aspects to me of her CV is that during her time working towards her MA, she spent a year working at the Allen as director of the Friends of Art children's classes. Such public K-12 outreach remains central to the work of our education department, and it's delightful to have her back, even briefly, in our fold. Please join me in warmly welcoming Barbara Wolanin for her talk entitled Caring for the Art of the Capitol.
I'm glad to be here, and I've always stayed in touch with Oberlin and met Andrea at different events, so it's really nice to be able to do this. I was hired as curator for the architect of the Capitol in 1985, and as you heard, I had a PhD, but I had been teaching art history, and I loved teaching, and I wasn't sure I wanted a job with a lot of government red tape and supervising, but thought I better try it, at least for a few years. And that's what I thought. I said 5 years maximum, I'll go back to teaching. But guess what? I didn't. And I think that if I had known I was going to be in the same office for 30 years, I might not have taken the job. But it was challenging and never boring at all. So the Allen Art Museum is where I started out as a studio art major. So I was taking painting and sculpture and printmaking, which I actually think is important for art historians to know how things are actually made. And it was very important for my job as well. I really felt like a lot of what I did at the Capitol was really had the foundation. It was things that I got at Oberlin in the museum, learning how important it was to really look hard at works of art very carefully, and as well as in the studio. I also knew that when I was a student, there was a conservation major. And I even thought about, did I want to major in art conservation? It interested me. But I knew that I don't have a lot of patience. I'm not sure I could do the 1 little square inch of cleaning something in a day, and I can be a little bit klutzy. And I thought, well, this isn't going to be good for me. But I was always very aware of the importance of knowing whether a work of art has been conserved, if it looks like it should look, or whether it's been damaged or anything like that. And I also did a lot of work on Italian frescoes as part of my art history classes. And that was really useful because of all the frescoes in the United States Capitol that are so rare for this country. So this actually is a picture of some things I have in my house that I did when I was an art major at Oberlin. The bust, I did a concrete a bust that I did in clay and cast in concrete and paint. And it's a painting that I did of the sculpture studio, just showing some of the things I did. So my talk was advertised with this beautiful watercolor by Thomas Moran of the Grand Canyon. And he had gone on a big expedition in 1871 and did beautiful watercolors. They were shown to the Congress, and this has resulted in the Yellowstone National Park Protection Act in 1872. But one thing that I realized looking over but then later, the Congress actually purchased these two huge, magnificent paintings of the Yellowstone that Moran did. I mean, they're like 12 feet wide. And they actually hung in the Capitol in a special room where they were on view for a long time. But they turned that room into a press gallery. Nobody was coming in to see them. It was all crowded. And so they gave them to the Department of Interior in 1950. For many years, they were on view at the American Art Museum, and now they're back in the Interior Department. But everything in the Capitol really is there partly because of politics. The congressmen aren't just trying to create an art collection. There's a political story with it, as in these paintings. But I realized that at Oberlin, I never knew that I would be specializing in American art history. There still isn't a lot of American art in the museum. And I think I just audited one American art class, and I took classes from Ellen Johnson. I was more interested really in European art at the time, and never imagined I'd be doing the American. So when I got the job, I thought that the architect maybe had 10 people. I mean, there's an architect to the Capitol's built, what is it? But it's a huge office. It's not actually an agency because it's under the Congress. There's a person who's the architect to the Capitol, but it's this office of 2,300 people and taking care of, you can see, millions of square feet of facilities and huge acres, 570 acres of grounds. And the architect always had a hard job because he would say that he has 535 bosses. Every congressman was somebody he had to listen to, and senator, and also had the Library of Congress looking over him, the Supreme Court, because he's taking care of all of these buildings. So what I was involved in is if there were murals, there were art, there was sculpture that was under the care of the architect, that was joint, things out on the grounds, the historic buildings and things like that were all things that I got involved in. So it's a lot to take care of. So I worked under 3 different architects in my 30 years, and these are the architect portraits. Actually, the middle one, I was involved in getting it commissioned. And my office was right there in the center of the Capitol, in this basement area, right off that door. So at least for a long time, I could get out and walk around at lunchtime, which was nice, and also get up into the Capitol to see if there was a problem with anything and take care of it right away. I was a division director. This is something I was worried about, being a supervisor of all these people. And it was not just the curator office. I had a curator's assistants and a writer editor, but I also had 2 branches under me. One was the records management archives branch, and they had a tremendous responsibility too, starting with the 1850s records of the construction of the dome and the wings of the Capitol, like this beautiful ink and watercolor by Thomas Eustace Walter, and all the records that were being produced by the architect of the Capitol, all the different parts, the engineers, each buildings had different superintendents. And that's one thing I liked about the job, is all the different kind of people I worked with. I mean, sometimes I was working with a Speaker of the House or a high-level congressional person or staff, but I also liked working with the carpenters and the electricians and the laborers, all the people that were also helping preserve everything around us. And then the photography branch also had things way back to glass plate negatives, like this one showing the Capitol still under the dome still under construction with Civil War soldiers out in front of it. And they had to document every important event like a laying in state or the inauguration. And so all of the records then got really challenged. Everything, of course, eventually went digital. So instead of glass plates or films, the photography was digital. Everything had to be archived, and all the records started being produced that were digital. So that was a huge challenge. When I started, there was a Senate curator, and I was supposed to take care of everything that was joint under the architect or that was under the House of Representatives. It was really a lot. I really only had one assistant for it. And one of the things, though, that I continued to do that dealt with the House of Representatives was every year there was a program that started before I started where every member of the House of Representatives could have a competition in his or her district, and the winner would be hung in this long tunnel that went between the Capitol and the Cannon office building. And when I first years doing that, there were under 200 pictures that came in. And at the end, there was almost every member was doing, there was over 400, got more and more crowded. And it was a huge challenge to get them all sorted and labeled and checked. And they all had to be hung just by state. So it wasn't a big aesthetic thing, but it was a huge challenge and people really enjoyed it a lot. The other thing that I was proud of when I came, I thought, well, once I learn everything about the Capitol, I should just leave. Well, then I learned you're never going to learn everything about the Capitol. We had these huge amount of archives and records and fascinating stories. We had files on every work of art, every room in the Capitol, every sculpture. So I proposed a fellowship program, and I got it started right away in 1986 because the United States Capitol Historical Society was funding it. And so I was managing it and they funded it. And so if it had taken legislation, it would have taken many, many years to start. And I was very proud of all the research projects that happened, all the books that resulted from the fellowship, and all the different scholars in American art that were benefited from it. But the main reason that I was hired was the architect, George White, had just started to do a conservation program and to focus on murals, and particularly the murals and frescoes of Constantino Brumidi. There had been a survey done, and when I came, they'd already gotten the funding by the Congress to conserve the frieze around the base of the dome, which is actually in true fresco, painted at the end of Brumidi's life. In fact, he didn't even finish it. So he was painting it 1879. And it had been leaked on and damaged and actually didn't even get finished until the 1950s. So this was the scaffold. This was the worst scaffold that I ever had to climb up. And when they were interviewing me for the job, they didn't ask me if I was scared of heights. Luckily, I wasn't. But this one was the worst because the higher you got up, the more it wiggled, and it got really scary getting up to the top. At that point, the Congress hadn't put itself under laws like OSHA. And so we could do a scaffold like this, which wouldn't have been approved under those rules. But I love this picture with the conservators up there. You can see how large the figures are, how dramatic they are. They were painted to look like carved stone. And when you walk into the rotunda and look up, you can be fooled by what Brumidi did there. He was really a master of making two-dimensional surfaces really look three-dimensional. And the other big project was that they talked about, what I was hired, was the huge canopy, the big painting right under the dome, almost 5,000 square feet of fresco that Brumidi painted himself in 1865 at the end of the Civil War, showing George Washington rising up to the heavens with 13 maidens around him representing the 13 states, various groupings down below of classical Roman gods and goddesses connected with American history and technology. So all of these things I'm showing you, I could give you a whole lecture on, but I won't do that. But this is the scaffold we had there. It actually had an elevator, took us up to a platform, and then on top, there were different rolling scaffolds so they could reach the whole curve of it. So the canopy had been supposedly was going to be restored in 1959, but the person that did it was not, there were no real conservators then. And he was an artist, and he got up there, and what he did, he decided, well, it was kind of crumbling, and it was going to be too difficult to really clean it. So instead of that, he painted over everything, repainted it. But luckily, he painted it with something that was water-based. So when the conservators got up in here now in 1988, they started cleaning it just with water, and it was like bright yellow light coming in with this almost dark charcoal gray. I mean, this huge difference. And I had really thought Bermidi wasn't a very good artist because everything in the Capitol was dirty, dark, painted over, and really wasn't very attractive. But the conservator brought the major experts on murals that were consulting on the Sistine Chapel over to see what we were doing. And they were just exclaiming about how good Bermidi was. And that was really when I started with this idea that there needed to be a book about him. So this shows you the scene, how it looked before the conservation. And because the fresco has to be painted in sections, all these joins had darkened and were very obvious. And it was something that Bermidi wanted to try to fix, but they never let him do that. And how beautiful the scene looked here with Athena talking to Benjamin Franklin and Robert Fulton and Samuel F. B. Morse there with batteries actually here. So there's the technology. So I also, at the same time, we were able to get into a committee room, which was the House Appropriations Committee room at that time, to conserve Bermidi's very first fresco. It was his trial fresco in the Capitol that Captain Montgomery Meigs, who was in charge of construction, let him do in the room where he was working. Meigs had this, I call him the art patron of the Capitol. He was trying to get as much art into the Capitol as he possibly could. And he was the one who wanted frescoes and didn't know anybody in America that could paint frescoes until one day in late 1854, Bermidi showed up and said he could do them. And so he did this one of Cincinnatus Called from the Plow. Everybody came to see it, liked it. He got put on the payroll and stayed on the payroll through the whole construction of the Capitol. But it's really a beautiful, beautiful room. Another one of my favorite rooms, and actually the only other one that Bermidi got to 100% finish, because what would happen is he would be working and then the Congress would come back or the committee wanted to use the room and he had to stop and never got to finish. This is the president's room, the most lavish, beautiful room in the Capitol, right off the Senate chamber. And I love it because it's, for a long time, it was the only space that still had the 1850s chandelier that was originally lighted with gas, and the 19th century furniture, the beautiful mitten tile floor, but these beautiful murals with gilding on the walls and frescoes. And it's just really amazing. And what I liked about the job, and this little picture is shows, I love being able to get up close on the scaffold with the conservators and work with them. And I forgot to tell you something I was going to tell you in the beginning, was that my first week when I got on the job, I was told that I had been signed up for a conference that I had to go to. And the conference was called Making Informed Conservation Decisions. And guess where the conference was? It was at Oberlin. So I went back to Oberlin for this wonderful conference. And the point of it was that curators have to work closely with conservators. They have to help make decisions. They have to help make the judgment calls, do the research to help work with the conservators as a team. And that really guided my whole time at the Capitol of doing that, which I love because I love working with the conservators. They're like artists. And I love being that involved with all these decisions in these beautiful spaces. But the president's room, you can see, is still used by the president. Even today, every president, usually after the inauguration, as Biden did, signed some legislation in the room. One of the other most spectacular of the conservation things was this room, which was the Senate Appropriations Committee, and it's still used for that. And Bermidi had painted it for the Naval Affairs Committee. And the these beautiful floating maidens were on these wonderful blue backgrounds. But over the years, with soot and the fireplace being used, the backgrounds got painted over dark green, like a forest green. And I always knew they should be the blue, and had some testing done. But trying to get into that committee room was not easy at all. All of a sudden, the committee chairman at the time found out about the blue, that they should be blue, and he ordered the architect to get the room conserved. So all of a sudden we scrambled and did a lot of testing, and were able to then uncover the beautiful blue of the room and get all these walls restored again over many summers, because that's when we could get in when the committee wasn't meeting. So some of these took years and years and years. Bermidi worked at the Capitol over a 25-year span. I worked there for 30 years, but painting a room is much faster than trying to get it conserved and get the scaffolds up and do all the things, get the permissions that we did, get the money funded and everything. So there's still a lot of rooms in the Capitol by Bermidi that still haven't been conserved. The biggest area that he decorated was the corridors on the first floor of the Senate that have been always called the Bermidi corridors. He painted the walls and ceilings with a lot of people helping, with decorative painters and artists helping him, between 1857 and 1859, when the Senate was moving into its new wing. And when they were done, the newspapers said, "Oh, these are beautiful. They're painted in red, white, and blue." But this is what they looked like when I came. They were like pea green, yellow ochre. Not the details weren't very beautiful, because what happened, there were no conservators. So when they got dirty, more than once, over every few years, they would hire a painter to paint over them. And of course, they weren't as good as Bermidi. And then they painted to match the dirt a lot of the times. And then the next guy came along and matched more dirt. And so there were layers and layers in some of these areas that totally covered up what Bermidi did. So you can see the little test sample there. When the conservator did that, all of a sudden, we decided we needed to start working on the walls. We had started with the frescoes over the doorways that were done by Bermidi. All of a sudden, we started bit by bit getting money, and the Congress did support this every year to do a few more of these sections of the corridor. You can see how painstaking it is. And one of the principles of two things with modern conservation is, one, when you in paint or fix something that was damaged, you don't do it with the same kind of paint that the original artist used. You do it with something that's reversible, that could be washed off later, so people will always know what's original. And the other thing is, they're very carefully documented in huge detailed reports, so that people in the future will know what happened and what was, original, what was added, what the conservator found out. So doing these walls really got me interested in proposing the book. And the book on Bermidi that I worked on there were some chapters by other scholars and the conservator, but was finally published in 1998. And it's still available on the Government Printing Office website. And the story of this is the history of each space and each room by Bermidi, but also about the difference that conservation made and how important it is to, preserve these things and to keep the conservation up and to keep going back and checking things. Every couple of years, we're trying to go back and check and make sure if anything gets damaged, then it's fixed right away. So this is what the corridors look like after the walls were all conserved. You can see, if you remember that other picture, what a huge difference it made. Beautiful colors, wonderful details. And what the corridors were about, they were based on Raphael's Loggia in the Vatican, but the theme was all the things living and growing in America, all the squirrels and birds and animals and flowers and fruits. It's just really celebrating things in America. And the bust of Bermidi there is there appropriately. But if you look at the top of the image, you can see the ceilings had not been conserved. And so those ceilings still have the awful pea green, the dark colors. You can see the difference. Bermidi painted those walls to look like they were carved out of stone. And that was lost. So this was a big accomplishment. But again, what happened? This has taken many, many years to do. And the people in the Senate that were interested about it, Senate Rules Committee said all of a sudden, we don't want to wait another 20 years to get all the ceilings conserved. We want them all conserved in 5 years. So this was the floor plan of the things in yellow still needed all the ceilings done. Some of those inner corridors hadn't been touched at all. And we had to come up with a contract, bid out the contract, get the funding, and come up with a plan to do this in 5 years. But what it depended on was the Senate then allowed the architect to put these big scaffolds up and let the conservators work all the time. Before that, the conservator had been working at night or could only do it during the August recess. So that was how it was able to be accomplished. The ceilings were actually more difficult in a way because they were painted with water-based paint and then painted over with oil paint. So cleaning them was really tricky. This area is called the patent quarter, and this is showing before the ceiling was conserved. You can see again, the contrast, and then the two little details, or how a lot of the beautiful details were still recovered by the conservator. I mean, really delicate and wonderful. And it was called the patent quarter because the patent committee met near there, and there's inventors like Robert Fulton in the pictures, and here you can see scientific instruments in it. Another thing that I did related to Bermuda was there was somebody that lobbied the Congress, got the legislation approved to have a gold medal for Bermuda. Now, usually gold medals are given to people who are alive, but Bermuda didn't even have any known descendants or anything like that. But so the gold medal was approved. I got to work with the Mint on designing it, and it finally got presented, but it's actually on display in the Capitol Visitor Center because there wasn't any family to give it to. So that was interesting. Then there was a follow-up book of new research on Bermuda published in 2014 to complement the one that I had done in 1998. So at the same time, all these things were going on in the Capitol. The other big project that I had been hired to do was to be in charge of the conservation of all the murals in the Jefferson Building, the Library of Congress, which opened in 1897. Beautifully decorated, the whole building, with 20 artists, murals, about 100 different murals in all, just lavishly all over the building. So I had to find a qualified conservator and manage the contract, and which seemed like a lot of money then. It was over $1 million contract. Now $1 million isn't as much as it was in the 1980s, but it was a complicated one to do. And what had happened, the library had really ignored a lot of these 1897 murals. When they were worried about energy costs, they put drop ceilings, and you see on the picture on the left where the white goes up partway up the room, that was where the drop ceiling was. So all the people were working under there, not realizing there were all these beautiful murals overhead. This one by Robert Lefwich Dodge is one of the most dramatic conservation things because it was painted directly on the plaster, and there was leaks and things like that. And they opened windows before air conditioning, all the soot and everything came in. And you can see that you could really barely even see there were figures almost when you started, very little about them. So there's a partly cleaned mural, and then at the bottom, the same scene with after all the in-painting and the cleaning and everything. Each room had different materials, different artists, different problems. This one, the gilding behind the figures had sort of alligator. It looked like a turtle back or something. And it turned out, we had somebody investigate this, that they didn't apply the glue correctly, but it was really taken away from the figures. And so we ended up having the conservators re-gild, you can see very painstakingly around all the letters and everything, to then restore the room. And the library, all the murals really were all conceived within the whole decorative painting scheme, the colors in the floors, the mosaic floors and the walls and everything all work together so beautifully. Of course, back in the Capitol, there were things like the rotunda paintings that I had to watch out for. They had been conserved before I was curator, but some of them had some problems. And I did have the 1894 gilded frames conserved. You can see how delicate all this work is. There's also a lot of sculpture in the rotunda. One of the things that I really had a lot to do with was the portrait monument that was donated in 1921 after women got the vote, with Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Lucretia Mott on it, done by a woman artist who, instead of doing 3 separate busts, which is what her commission was, she's carved them all into an 8-ton block of marble. And the Congress allowed the ceremony to happen in 1921, but then the monument went down to the lower level because it was so heavy. So in 1997, a law was passed that the architect had to move this up to the rotunda, and it actually still is more than 7 tons of marble. It was very, very tricky, scary move. It's up there in the rotunda now. And one of my favorite sculptures it's been in the rotunda for many, many years, the Abraham Lincoln by Vinnie Ream, who was the first woman artist to get a government commission for art. And when she signed the contract, she was only 18 years old. And Lincoln had let her come into the White House and do a bust of him, which is how she was able to create such a beautiful face on it. For she had the marble carved in Italy, which all the male artists were doing as well. Another statue that's in the rotunda is Dwight Eisenhower. He is one of the National Statuary Hall statues. In 1864, every state was invited to give 2 statues, bronze or marble, to the Capitol. But when I came, we didn't even have all 100. We didn't have all 100 until 2005. But before that, somebody put something in a law in 2000, and I still don't know who, that said states can start switching statues. So the Eisenhower was one that was replaced a marble 19th century statue and came in 2003. And these replacements are still going on now. The National Statuary Hall is the beautiful room that used to be the Hall of the House, where it was carefully arranged with bronze and marble statues. And that arrangement is still pretty much intact. I really thought that was important to keep. But trying to keep these statues conserved was hard because people loved to rub their toes when all the patina would rub off. They would get dusty and dirty, and the Capitol has police officers, but they're not museum guards. They weren't stopping people from touching things. So finally, after many years of trying, we finally got a contract with the conservator, ongoing contract. So periodically, more than once a year, the statues are all conserved. If the toes get rubbed, then the patina is restored. And so we're keeping them my successor's keeping them still in good condition. So there's one statue in National Statuary Hall that's not a state statue. It's the one of Rosa Parks. And again, there was some politics or law that was passed. Jesse Jackson Jr., who was in the Congress, wanted a statue of Rosa Parks. He wanted her in Statuary Hall so she could stare down Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis statues. So she actually ended up being placed where Robert Lee had been after we did moves for the visitor center. But and so there was a law passed. The architect had to find the money for it, and I suggested doing a national competition using the National Endowment for the Arts for the competition. Way over 100 artists applied, got down to the top 10 who made small maquettes. And here's the maquette that was finally selected by the Joint Committee on the Library, which is the committee that I had to work with for all the approvals of statues. So I got to go out to California and critique the clay model, and then to see the bronze after it was cast in the foundry. And here's the final statue. And in this case, very rare thing, President Obama came and helped with the unveiling the statue, which was even the only time that a president ever came to do that. So there was a lot of interest in it. And what I liked about it, I was glad that the Congress had picked what was my favorite image was she's sitting and she's resolute, but she's not literally. Some of the artists literally had her on the bus seat, and she did a lot more than just that one thing that should be honored. So then another thing that I got to do, even though there was a Senate curator, the Senate law said that the architect had to contract and commission the marble bust for vice presidents. Every vice president gets a marble bust. And so the one I was involved with, the one of for Dan Quayle, and then people were concerned about Vice President Cheney and his health and wanted to get that done. And Al Gore still didn't have his done. I was really hard to find someone who knows how to carve marble and to do good portraits. Most people do busts in bronze. It's much less expensive than marble, much less laborious. And so actually the same artist, William Behrens, got the contracts for both Cheney's bust and Gore's bust. And I got to go to his studio and see him working and help, prove what was being done, which was interesting. He did do life sittings with both men, and you can see also used a lot of photographs. So here's the Cheney bust. And again, my sculpture training at Oberlin helped with this, going from the clay to the plaster model. Then there's using the traditional pointing machines going into the marble, which was, the sculptor actually was kind of very nervous about it. When you're carving marble, if you take too much off, you can't put it back. And so but anyway, he did a good job. And of course, Vice President Cheney had to approve it and everything. Here it is when it came in, everybody approved it. And now it's on view in the Senate. And I understand the Gore bust still hasn't been unveiled. So it's still in storage. I don't know when that's going to happen. But in addition to all the statues inside the Capitol, I was also involved in ones out on the Capitol grounds, the Peace Monument and the Garfield Monument. And again, what happened, all of a sudden the law was passed and the ground that those were on were put under the architect. And my boss said, look into those circles and see about those statues. I think maybe you need to do something about them. The Peace Monument was really disintegrating, and we did a lot of work on consolidating the marble, and the Garfield was all green and got it back to its, what I think was the color that it would have been originally. But again, these have to be conserved periodically every few years. Right out on the west of the Capitol was this huge Grant Memorial. And I always felt terrible because it looked like it was part of the Capitol grounds. But for years, it was under the National Park Service, who did not conserve it or take care of it. All of a sudden, at the end of my time as curator, the Congress put that land under the Congress, and it was up to the architect of the Capitol to take care of it. So we were finally able to start a huge project on getting the Grant Memorial conserved. It made a huge difference. So that was really good to see. I always say the highlight of my whole job was taking care of the Statue of Freedom on top of the dome. A Statue of Freedom that was sculpted by Thomas Crawford, and his plaster model then was cast in bronze by Clark Mills. And she was put up on top of the Capitol during the Civil War in 1863, after the dome was completed enough. It was still being built during the Civil War. So when I came, the statue looked like this, and the dome was being painted every couple of years. And I asked to say, well, can we check the statue while the painting's going on? I was told, no, you can't do that. But every year the painters would go up and they would caulk the seams between the different sections of the bronze. It was cast in 5 main pieces, and it really, looked terrible. But in 1988, what happened was a piece of bronze came off when they were up there, and they also had to sharpen the lightning points on top of her feathers when they were doing the painting. And the architect at the time says, oh, we've got to get it fixed. I was able to get a expert conservator to talk to him, and he agreed we could do a big engineering and conservation study, which we did. And the result of that was that in order to get the statue conserved, to get the pedestal that was cracked worked on, the statue had to be taken off the dome. So we didn't want to take her apart, had to take it off in one piece, and were able to get this really good helicopter. But that was really scary. But she was conserved down on the ground where people could see what was happening, which was wonderful. Here's the pedestal that was being worked on, that was sandblasted and cleaned. And here's I'm with the architect George White there, who was very involved with the conservation, and the conservator Linda Merck-Gould, as we were going through all the stages in the conservation. And of course, she went back up and is still there. And we started doing follow-up conservation about every couple of years. And she now is protected just with a incralac coating. So she's going every 3 or 4 years. Scaffold. We got the scaffold stored under the dome, so it didn't have to be carried up every time. And here I am looking like, I always feel I look like a little fairy or something over her shoulder. But I went up with a conservator after the next day to check the coatings and everything. And again, it wasn't very safe, really. The scaffold was coming down, and we did it, though. We did it. But you can see that being up there by that statue is a wonderful view of the city. And then, as I said, every few years, I got to go up again, which was fun, but a little scary because you can see you're not tied down or anything. You're climbing way, way up. She's 289 feet above the East Front Plaza. But I felt like it was important to go up, see what the conservators were doing. I couldn't sign off on the contract unless I knew it was done right. And I made my successor go up there too. So she was scared, but she did it. And the other thing about the statue was I had to check inside her. She's hollow bronze, and to climb up a ladder and go up and check. There were leaks sometimes inside. And that's part of the reason she has to be maintained, that the joints open up. So I got to do that as well. So this is the last time I went up before I retired. At that point, the dome was being renovated. We had to wear all the protective hard hats and vests and everything like that. And it was a difficult climb. And my photographers set up this thing to take this picture of me, so showing from a distance how high, me on top of those feathers looking down on the top of the statue's head, which I always said is really the highlight of my job. Another big thing that happened while I was there was the construction of the Capitol Visitor Center. I was involved with that and planning on it with a whole big committee of people. It's underground in front of the Capitol, and with big skylights, as you can see, where people can get their tours and come in that way. And originally, there was part of the construction money was going to be for commissioning art for the visitor center. But after 9/11, all the money got spent on security, and so there was no art commissioned. And so the only art that's in the visitor center is the plaster model for the Statue of Freedom, which this picture over here is when I first came on the job. She was chainsawed in pieces in storage with the Smithsonian. We brought her and restored her in the Russell Building in 1993. And she had been at the Smithsonian for 75 years. That's why she survived. Most of these plaster models never survived. And I always wanted her to go in the visitor center. And finally, that did get approved. And she's here in what's called Emancipation Hall. And she really enlivens the whole place. But this is the actual model, about 20 feet high, like the bronze, that the bronze was cast from. And it gives people a chance to see all her details up close, which I love. But my big job on the visitor center was moving statues from the Statuary Hall collection, coming up with a plan and figuring out where to put them and where the floor could hold the weight and where the ceiling wasn't too low. And really, literally worked on this for 3.5 years and got a lot of pressure to put more statues down there. Some of them are in places that you can't see them very well. But again, it was the politics of the committee said it had to be done. The architect had to do it, and I had to help carry that out too. So appreciate that when you ever go into the visitor center. And of course, I was involved with helping with the big exhibition hall that's there as well, which tells more about the Congress and the history of the Congress than the art, but it has some of both. So you remember where I told you my office was, right here in the center of the Capitol. And you can imagine what I felt when I saw what was going on TV on January 6th, as Andrea mentioned, 4 months ago. I was just horrified. Things being broken, the police being overwhelmed. This is the door right by where I had worked all those years, and windows being broken right across the hall, people coming in and terrified about, of course, the Congress. I'm worried about that, but I was worried about the art, what was going to happen to it all. These people with flags and even some of them with swords and things like that. If they had focused on the art, they could have slashed paintings, broken things, knocked statues over. But thank goodness they weren't focused on damaging the art. I'm just so thankful for that. But what they did, spraying fire extinguishers and there's pepper spray and the different things like that, those got on statues, on the Bermuda Quarter murals, on paintings. And I'd never realized that. I've learned that fire extinguishers have oil, they have yellow dye in them. So it's going to be very tricky. I mean, that kind of a cleaning is still going on. But luckily not major damage of things being broken or slashed or things like that. The architect actually estimated to the Congress that there was $30 million worth of damage. A lot of that was on the inaugural stands, there were some of the Olmsted lanterns broken, things like that, things that were stolen. But I am just so thankful that with all of the people and all the things that were happening, all the violence, that the art somehow survived. And I also have to really acknowledge the architect. Just the 2 weeks later, they got everything cleaned up and beautiful for the inauguration, which, was a job, and all the people that worked for the architect, were so dedicated, and was really one thing that I liked, about working there. Everybody was caring about doing their best and taking care of this wonderful national treasure, which I believe it's under the Congress, but it belongs to all of us. It is a national treasure, and it's really all of ours. And I was really proud to have been able to help take care of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. That was absolutely wonderful, and just, I think, a pleasure for everyone in our audience to hear you talking about this 30-year career where you dealt with so many different aspects of the art and just so many different media, as well as scholarship. And it's just been absolutely fascinating to hear about this. Obviously, it made me think at certain points of the much smaller project we worked on at the Allen about 5 years ago, where we had our ceiling and clerestory paintings conserved. And just there's so much of what you did over all of those decades that has just preserved these really important works for the future. As you can imagine, we have a number of questions that have been coming in. And so I just want to take some of those here. They're all really excellent. So the very first question that came in: what is the proportion of female artists and artists of color to white male artists? And I know that you did mention the one work, the portrait monument by Adelaide Johnston. Is there anything more you can say about that in terms of
something that interested me a lot? And of course, there's actually in the late 19th and early 20th century, there were a lot of women artists, sculptors getting commissions for the National Statuary Hall statues, which was really interesting. And then, like in the Rosa Parks, there were women that competed for the sculpture, but it ended up with a team of male artists that got that, but there were women that were, on the top level as well. So there's, I was always trying to track that, how many women artists, how many representations of women. And of course, now people are really interested in, there's a lot more. And, but each state statue, the state has their competition, and there have been a couple more women sculptors picked for those than there were before. But actually the Congress now is really thinking about trying to add more women to the representation. The only Black artist is the artist that won the competition for the Martin Luther King bust that's in the rotunda. And so that would be one, but that, okay. And the Statue of Freedom assistant to Clark Mills was somebody I did a lot of research on, named Philip Reeds, who was enslaved, owned by Clark Mills, and helped cast the Statue of Freedom. And we know that because slaves could be paid directly for when they worked on Sunday, and he was keeping the fires going under the molds on Sunday, and we have the documents in the archives of him being paid. And the nice thing is that when the statue finally went up, he was freed. The slaves in the district were freed. And there's evidence of, of slaves helping build the Capitol early on, but not, a lot of it isn't documented. If they're working for a contractor, you don't know who the people are. So, but that's always interested me a lot.
Thank you. Here's another different type of question, but it's something that you alluded to a lot in your talk. How challenging was it to deal with removing, adding, or restoring artwork at the whim of lawmakers?
Well, the state statutes is up to the states to do that. So there was a committee, joint committee on the library, which was half House and half Senate. They would make the approvals of that. But then there were some things that came in on a whim of a lawmaker or one person really pushing it. But most of it went through the committee, and and the architect could make the case for it, why something was worth coming in or not, because the Capitol doesn't accept donations very much, because anything that's accepted has to have a place to go permanently. It's not like a regular museum where the art would be changing. Once it's there, it's at that place unless the committee approves moving it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I have two questions that they're a bit related, so I'm going to give you both at once. They're not exactly the same, but a bit related. One person asks, why was there such a dedicated push for conservation during your tenure after what seems like years of giving it a lower priority? And the other person says, in your time working there, did you see an increased awareness of the significance of the art and its importance for the history of our country? And she references all this restoration work that was done during your time, which suggests that people are coming to appreciate the art more. Can you speak a little bit to those?
I should have brought that in. Well, so what happened? I mean, as I said, there were such people as conservators, even into the 1960s. There was the American Institute for Conservation was founded. Conservators started being trained, and I think it was the American Bicentennial that got people in this country more interested in American art and its importance. And the whole preservation movement didn't start really until the 60s. And people just were not aware of that very much. And so then the architect, George White, that I first worked under, and my direct boss had been in the conservation field. And then they got the Congress to agree to start doing the conservation program. And as I said, I was really pleased. I think there was only 1 year that the Bermuda corridors didn't get funded. We were able to get the support of the Congress to do that. And I've always felt too it was important to educate people about it, try to tell people what was going. That's why I wanted to do the book. But also I felt it was important to try to educate that, the people giving the tours, the tour guides, and the people working in the Capitol, and started programs for architect to the Capitol staff, because if you don't know something's important or historic, you're not going to take care of it, and you have to know about it first.
Very, very true. Expertise is really so important in so many areas. Richard Spear, who's a former director of the Allen, is listening in, and he's written that he's curious, what are the qualifications of your successor, hopefully well-trained as you are in art history, but it would be good to know, we know that you've only retired a very short time ago. So it's, there's a new person in.
I hung on way too long because I knew I wanted to get a good successor. And I'm the third curator that the architect had with a PhD. Actually, the House and Senate curators only have master's degrees, and I thought it was important that the architect continue that. They agreed that they wanted to hire somebody with a PhD. I was able to help with the hiring process, and the person that I think was the best qualified person in the country, who has a PhD in American art history, but she was better qualified than I was when I came, because for 20 years she took care of the art in the New York City public schools. So she had been conserving murals with some of the same conservators, statues, architectural drawings, working with engineers and architects, and not very many art historians do that. So then I stayed on and I mentored her for a year and a half too. I was able to do that to try to have a smooth transition. So I'm and she was just actually on PBS on this week talking about the Capitol. So I told her I was proud of her. She's really continuing what I was doing. Yeah.
That's great. Here I have another two questions. They're a bit related, so I'll give you both at once. One is that you mentioned the politics of artistic decisions several times. Were you personally ever able to participate in or intervene in some of these debates? And kind of a corollary related question, were there any sort of congressional heroes who supported and encouraged your work, or villains who stymied it? And can you share any anecdotes?
Well, I forgot to say one thing, was that, of course, when I was working for the architect, I was serving the whole Congress, and my personal political views couldn't, be in play. I had to be neutral, and the architect had to serve anyone. So here I was doing busts of Vice President Cheney and Gore, and meeting with them in person and everything at the same time. And I had definitely political beliefs, but they could not come in. My job was to get the best possible bus that I could for the Capitol. So that's what I did. But I did work with people. I tried to work with the states, even if I could, to get make sure they had good quality sculptors for the state statues, because they were going to be in the Capitol forever. I mean, I did work with, committees, had good relations with some of the Joint Committee on the Library staff, work closely with them. And, it's like behind the scenes. It's more not the official record, but there weren't enough members of Congress really interested in art. I would have liked to have had more, but there were some, and the ones that did care about it, made a difference and pushed, like the conservation of some of the Bermuda murals. I got personally interested and push it. Had one senator that I also took care of murals that were from 1900. I didn't even have time to talk about those, but he was supposed to move into a room that had murals that really needed conservation. And I was able to talk to him and his wife, and he was agreed to wait to move in until we got the conservation done, So, again, it's educating people. And another congressman, asked me to give tours for some of his constituents and things like that. And he was very involved with the visitor center and the art. So, bits and pieces like that.
Excellent. Now, here again, I'm trying to group some things. There was a question earlier, and I don't think I'll be able to show this image, but a person has written in with an image. And he notes, he says that he was surprised to find a stereograph, a photograph of a sculpture outside the Capitol with a horrible misrepresentation of the history of Native Americans in the U.S.
Oh yes.
So you know which one it is.
I do. Okay.
So he says, researching it, he found a reference that it had been moved maybe in the 50s and was stored on the grounds of the Capitol's energy plant. And the question is, what happens to pieces that are moved from the Capitol like that?
Those are really interesting, because they're horrendous treatments of the Native Americans. Even in the rotunda, there's the way the Native Americans are treated are really not good, but it's part of the history of our country. So those were put up. You see them in like inaugurations and things like that, mid 19th century. And as the time went on, people started complaining about them. Native American groups were complaining about them. And so in the 50s, the east front of the Capitol was extended to make more room, and the east front was rebuilt in marble, and the Congress did not put those sculptures back. There was one artist that proposed some new ones that never got made. They just were not put back, and they were by the power plant for a while. Then they were stored at the Smithsonian. And then one day I was told by the Smithsonian I had to get them moved. So one time, they were going down the highway. They are now in a warehouse. So they're safe, and they're historically important, but very problematical. And I tried to see if maybe even the Indian Museum would want to put them up and restore them and critique them, but it's never happened. So, but they were there for a long time.
And then just related to that, actually specifically, are there guidelines in place now to remove or keep statues or paintings as a result of sort of reviews, include, Confederate memorials or things that are reviewed by a committee and found to be?
Well, that's something now my successor is very much in the middle of dealing with. And I don't think there's been any decisions, but states are sometimes taking their statues out and replacing them. Like Robert E. Lee's statue went out of the Capitol. When it came into the Capitol in 1909, some of the northern congressmen complained about it. And they said, well, the law was the state could put whoever they wanted. So it's up, so those things are going on.
Okay. This one I think I know the answer to, but just to make sure, someone has written in, is there a statue planned or a sculpture planned for Kamala Harris? I assume as a vice president, but indeed there will be one planned.
Eventually, yeah.
Okay,
of course,
great.
Biden doesn't have his yet either. So
right.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, the first woman vice president bus would be great, right?
Yeah. So here's an interesting question. If people wish to stay on, I hope so. We have some good questions yet here. The apotheosis of Washington. Wasn't a representation like that contrary to the democratic ideals of the country? How did that painting come about?
Well, I think I have researched this too. I mean, every one of these things I could give you a whole hour on, but anyway, so the Thomas Eustace Walter had seen the apotheosis of Saint Genevieve in the Pantheon in Paris, and so he was inspired for that, building the dome, having a painting up, and there was, the saint was going up on top. And I think that was, and the idea of George Washington raising to the heavens was something other artists depicted after he died. And people had the pictures up in their houses and things. In that time, it didn't seem that implausible that the first president would be rising up to heaven that way. Now it seems funny to us, but
Here's a very specific question. This person has written that they've heard that George White was a very good artist and seriously into art conservation, as well as having a master's degree in electrical engineering from MIT when he was 21, an MBA from Harvard, a law degree from Case, and was a registered architect, and was also asked to be president of the AIA when he was only 39. What was it like to work with someone like that?
Well, yeah, he really appreciated degrees. He had a lot themselves. He thought it was important. And I enjoyed it because he took active interest. I mean, like in the Statue of Freedom, in the Library of Congress, he would come up on the scaffolds and look at it and decide if we could, spend the extra money for the gilding of something, things like that. So he was very engaged in it. And I didn't always agree with him, but he was really worked with me a lot.
Great. And then just, I think, one thing too, we want to note, Richard Spear has written in, and just lest Oberlin's pioneering Intermuseum Conservation Association be neglected, in light of your comments, because you talked about the fact that there used to be a conservation major at Oberlin. And Richard notes that it was founded as early as 1951 to serve the AMAM and other museums in the Midwest. And we still rely on them quite a bit for our conservation. But there's this wonderful long history at Oberlin of the importance of conservation, how critical that is to students learning and to students' future careers, as it turned out to be in your case, although you started off obviously with this interest in European art. And it's wonderful to see all of that coming together in your career.
So I did not realize that it started that early. So Oberlin really was a pioneer then in the conservation field.
It was. And that was founded actually by Charles Parkhurst, another former Allen director and monuments man at the end of World War II.
Right. So Oberlin, so that's where he got interested in how important it was to take care of the art from the world. Yeah, that's one. So that's a good point. Yeah.
So we just have two more questions. And again, I'm going to kind of group them. And you certainly alluded to this very beautifully at the end of your talk, Barbara. One person is inquiring, and this was actually before you spoke about this, so just in case you have anything more you want to add, is inquiring how much artwork damage was caused in the rampage on January 6th. You did allude to that. If there's anything more you want to say. Another person, though, has written in, and we'll make this the final question, what did you think of the decision, and I didn't know about this myself, to leave a broken window after the insurrection? Do you think that will remain?
I don't know. And because, I'm not there anymore and I haven't been down there, I think I maybe heard about that. I think I don't know. Most of the things were fixed, and I don't know. I don't know. Okay. I'm not in on that, but yeah, but it really was the things that were sprayed that did the damage. And when you think of the Bermuda Quarter and having to go and clean all those beautiful murals, I mean, it's a lot. Yeah. And
it's heartbreaking after what you went through so painstakingly over so many years, yeah. But we know that it's good to know from what you've shared with us today that they will be in good hands and that they will be cared for.
Yeah, I was really relieved and trying to find reports on, what really happened. So it could have been so much worse.
Yes. All right. Well, Barbara, I think you've given us a lot of food for thought here. Wonderful questions came in, and just great to spend this time with all of you. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you to everyone who's been on this Zoom. It's been a real pleasure to do this. And really, Barbara, we can't say thank you enough. It's been really wonderful.
Well, I enjoyed doing it. Thank you. Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye.